Good evening, friends. Thank you. Bonsoir, Jacques. And welcome to the 15th annual series of Elizabeth Seton lectures. The Religious Studies Department of Mount St. Vincent University, under the sponsorship of the Sisters of Charity, is pleased to bring to the Mount and to our region another remarkable speaker, this time in the person of Dr. John Kavanaugh. Before I introduce Dr. Kavanaugh to you, I would like to continue our custom of recalling at the beginning of the first session the origin and purpose of this set of lectures. And for that purpose, I'd like to invite a member of our Department of Religious Studies, Sister Elizabeth Bellefontaine, to do that for us. Betty?
Thank you, Barry. Good evening, and welcome to the annual Elizabeth Seton Lectures. I offer this welcome in the name of the Sisters of Charity and in the place of Sister Maria Sutherland, the Superior of the Halifax Province of the Sisters of Charity, who usually presents for us the origin and purpose of the lecture series, but who was unable to be with us this evening. The Elizabeth Seton Lectures began in 1978. That's for those of you who didn't subtract the 15 years that Barry just mentioned. And it began with the establishment of an endowment fund for this purpose by the Halifax Province of the Sisters of Charity. The decision to take this action was made in response to a proposal from the sisters who were on faculty here at the time and who recommended the sponsoring of such a program with the general theme of the Christian presence in the world, past, present, and future. We believed then, and we still believe, that these lectures would be a tangible contribution towards strengthening and expressing publicly Mount St. Vincent University's commitment to understanding the truth, to intellectual vigor, and to social responsibility. Many of you who have attended these lectures over the years, facilitated by the Religious Studies Department, can attest to their quality and their fidelity to this original vision. We are sure that this year's lecturer, Dr. John Kavanaugh, S.J., whose special concern is the values by which we live in this postmodern world, will make a special contribution to the university's aims and objectives. And as representative of the Sisters of Charity, Dr. Kavanaugh, I am pleased to welcome you as our Elizabeth Seton lecturer this year. Who is this woman whose name we have chosen for these lectures? Elizabeth Ann Seton, known to us as Mother Seton, is well known to many of you who have been associated with us over the years. But for those who may not have met her, allow me a brief introduction. She was born Elizabeth Ann Bailey in 1774 in New York, the second daughter of a wealthy Episcopalian family. Her mother died when she was not yet 3 years old. Her father remarried, and over the next 8 years, Elizabeth had 6 step-siblings. In 1794, at age 20, Elizabeth married William McGee Seton, son of a wealthy merchant, and in time 5 children were born to them. Her married life was interrupted by the illness and death of her husband, and in her 30th year she was left a widow, the family fortunes gone, and 5 children in her care. It was at this time of trial that Elizabeth came in touch with the Catholic Church, which she entered in 1805. Thus aligning herself with the poor and the immigrants of New York. Seeking to support her family by teaching school, she established a girls' school in Baltimore for paying and non-paying children. In the years to follow, she became the foundress of the Sisters of Charity in North America, a noted educator and leader of the church. Hers was indeed a full life, even in the short span of 47 years. She lived as daughter, sister, stepchild, half-sister, wife, mother, widow, single parent, educator, religious. There are likely few people here this evening who cannot identify with some aspect of Mother Seton's life. And finally, in 1985, she became the first native-born United States citizen to be declared saint of the Catholic Church. I'm sure that Mother Seton would listen with interest tonight to Dr. Kavanaugh's presentation, as she was dedicated in her own life and as an educator and a mother with the value-based and sometimes anguishing decisions which life requires. Elizabeth Seton, faced with a decision, never asked, "Is it easy?" She only asked, "Is it right?" And once convinced of the rightness of her choice, she found peace in doing God's will. Mount St. Vincent University commits itself to the continuing moral development of those sharing its life. The topic of this year's series, Recovering the Person in Postmodern Culture, will surely contribute in a very direct way to our ability to live in this moral way. So, for the Sisters of Charity and the Religious Studies Department, I welcome you again to the Elizabeth Seton Lectures.
Thank you, Betty. As you've heard, the Elizabeth Seton Lectures were inaugurated back in 1978. And since that time, we have had a series of prominent speakers come our way, and this year, of course, is no exception. We continue that tradition tonight with Dr. John Kavanaugh. As some of you can read on the back of your brochure, John Kavanaugh is a Jesuit priest. He holds master's degrees in arts, philosophy, divinity, and a doctorate in social philosophy. That's quite a background in itself, actually. He has spent time with the Missionaries of Charity in Calcutta and the Jean Vanier communities for the handicapped in Bangalore and Madras in India. He also taught theology and philosophy in Zimbabwe, Africa. In 1991, he was visiting professor at Creighton University with a joint appointment to the philosophy department and the Center of Health Policy and Ethics. He is presently professor of philosophy at St. Louis University and visiting lecturer at the Catholic Medical Center at St. John's University. He has received 2 outstanding teaching awards in his career. He is a syndicated columnist and was awarded the American National Catholic Press Award in Social Commentary 3 times in recent years. In 1988, he received the Australian Radio United Nations Award. I could go on, of course. I'll just mention that he's published a few books also. And the title of his lecture this evening is The Tyranny of Consumerism, Advertising and the Formation of Conscience. The lecture this evening will be a little different in format from what some of you at least are used to. Some of this lecture, a good part of this lecture, will be spent in the dark. He will, of course, enlighten us, but anyway, you see a slide set up there and a big screen in back of me. I'll let him explain that to you. It is with great pleasure that we welcome Dr. Kavanaugh to Mount St. Vincent University.
Did you think I disappeared? I'm very honored to be invited to come to Halifax, invited by the department and Jacques Goulet and by the Sisters of Charity and Sister Elizabeth and the university here It may seem somewhat inappropriate because I'm going to speak about culture, and supposedly I come from a different culture, and much of my observations have to deal with my own country that you may wish to or want to or be appalled at applying to your own culture. It's related to the problem of postmodernism, which I think the key has its decentering of the human person, its erosion of human identity. I believe not only are there philosophical and scientific expressions of this, academic expressions of it, there are powerful cultural expressions of it. And it is preeminently expressed in the United States through the media. And consequently, this is a reflection on the decentering of the person in media in the United States, largely through its educational system, which is advertising, the primary evangelizer of capitalist consumerism. Now the question is there a relationship to your own experience? And I was reading today that one of the things that Jean Chrétien has been referring to once in a while over the summer is that Canada must not become the 51st state. I wonder if there's a danger, first of all, if it becomes the 51st state of mind, because I think the United States culture is a state of mind. And when you look at the state of mind of the decentered person and the media, maybe there really is a question of a relationship of a form of media imperialism. I was reading an article by your own Mary Sparling, the director of the art gallery here, in which she noted that 77% of all the money spent on magazines in Canada go to the United States. I was just down at the Paper Chase last night. Every advertisement appears in magazines that can be found at the Paper Chase and found at local magazine stores much more easily than Chatelaine, for example, or Flair. So in magazines and in advertising, there's a powerful relationship, economic and I think value relationship. 85 cents out of every dollar in Canada spent on music goes to the United States corporations. 76% of every dollar goes to books. That's on up to 80%. She wrote this article a few years ago. It's up to 80%. 80 cents out of every dollar spent on books in Canada goes to American corporations on American books. That's Statistics Canada from this year. 96% of the cinema dollar. 90% of TV dramas. This year it's 95% of TV dramas goes to United States corporations. 92% of the comedies on television. We also note that since '88 with the FTA, there's been a 25% decline in the production of advertisements in Canada. That 25% has been made up by United States advertising companies. 25% decline since the free trade agreement. At the same time, funding for the CBC Corporation has decreased by 13%, which produces indigenous cultural product. So I think, in a way, the cultural state of mind of consumerism, as it's embodied in my country, may well be related to your own country, especially since 9/10 of all the homes that have television in Canada receive American programming, sometimes automatically. I don't think the acculturation process has taken full hold. I've been coming to Canada with joy for the last 20 years, and there's a unique, wonderful consciousness of Canadian people that if it's lost, I think there'll be a great loss to North America. And I think that it's still there, but in many ways there are great economic, cultural forces at work that partake in this decentering, erosion of personal existence. And so I offer this presentation to you as a reflection on that. It's rather negative about my country. I love the country that I was born in. I think there are many beautiful traditions, and I think most of them are at stake. I think most of the greatest parts of American tradition in many ways are in an extremely fragile condition. And so I give the same kind of presentation in the United States as well. I'd also like to apologize in advance for some of these visuals. because they're very striking. Some of them are extremely degrading to women. They all appear in magazines like Vogue, however. And so it's good to know that this goes on. Or the Rolling Stone magazine, if you're interested more in countercultural, quote, magazines, which it's not at all. And so I'd like to have the room darkened a bit and set up so that we can look at this. Sound okay? Great. I'm going to try something new with wonderful technology here. The issue is what is most real in our lives, and who tells us what is most real. I think we could even have it darker. This is an ad that appeared a while back in the Rolling Stones magazine, and what I find in teaching students is that they have an entire philosophical system already inbuilt, and it's a philosophical system that's immensely difficult to break through. It's largely related to the devaluation of persons and the valorization of objects. And I think it's related to the reality system of a North American culture, especially in the United States. This occurs through what you might call the media system, which mediate to us reality. You see, what I believe is, as Plato pointed out, whoever informs us, forms us. That's part of what all education is about. Information is formation. And so the question is, what is the dominant information giver in North American culture, especially in the United States? For me, obviously, it's television and my own analysis. As this ad says that appeared many years ago, it's almost prophetic. It's called Peace on Earth. There's not one person relating to another person in that advertisement. And it's an amazing statement about the reach of television, not only around the world. We know, for example, the first thing a coup takes over when they try to take over a country is the media system. Because whoever informs, forms. If you can control cognition, you can control desire. And so our cognitive system is intimately related to television. In the United States, for example, the figures are a little bit less in Canada. For example, the average United States citizen spends about 30 to 31 hours a week watching television. In Canada right now, it's 28 hours a week. By the time a child in the United States reaches the age of this young girl, about 5, she will spend, by the time she gets to first grade, more time watching television than she will if she goes to a university like this. For 4 years, all the college classroom experience had been matched in time by the time she was 5 watching television. This is still while the brain is developing, and we know even the saturation watching of television affects the development of the brain. By the time a person in the United States reaches the age of the woman in the middle, about 75, the average person there will have spent 14 uninterrupted years watching television. 14 years of our life. That's more time than we spend with any human being, spouse or child, more time than we spend at labor. The only thing we do more is sleep. And so this is an immense amount of just time in terms of watching. But what's even more interesting is the content of the material that forms our consciousness. It's the content of what you could call the consumer ideology or the consumer way of life. As you can see here, you have the entire spray of products and also the media system which tells us about the products. Whether it be Vogue magazine or RCA or NBC or the New York Times, there's a connection between our production system the economic system, and the media system. In fact, in many ways, in my country, the media system is owned by the producers, the major producers. And what they do is they form us in our identity. They have created, most recently, what the Wall Street Journal has called the gimme generation. We have built pleasure domes of commerce, it says, dedicated to the search. Great agglomerations of shops under one roof, climate-controlled, adorned by trees and fountains that never see the sun, places where some people spend entire days unashamed. In California, the bumper stickers say, "I shop, therefore I am." Nowadays, that's only half a joke. What makes us feel real? There's been an article by the Journal of Marketing Research that has said many people in the United States now feel their strongest moments of transcendence in the mall. That they feel a sense of identity, a sense of purpose, a sense of fulfillment, a sense of cohesion and union through this transcendent experience of buying. And what happens is that there's a formation of our identity that takes place. You're a Halston woman, the corporation, from the very beginning, to form us in terms of what it means to be a woman, as we'll see much more directly later on. To tell us that we're born with the credit card in our mouth, that becomes our whole system of nutrition for us in our consciousness, that we must have our Calvin Klein diaper covers even though we're only a toddler, or that good taste starts early, or that we are tiny treasures, tiny commodities, with our tiny commodities. It's interesting, these two girls must be about 3 or 4 or 5, and they're already sexually charged as models with her Chanel and Nina Ricci. The boys, too, are formed as well. It's very interesting, this formation of our identity as children. And last night I bought the latest issue of Chantelan. I'd like to read you a little interesting thing that actually I found appalling about Canada. These are 10-year-old kids. Think of these boys up here. This article is called "Boys Will Be Men. 10-year-old Canadians Talk." The quotation says, "They rarely appear in public without their teal blue Charlotte Hornets caps and the Nike Flight runners. They like baseball, hockey, basketball, and football in that order. They find school boring and hate math. That's nothing new. They love comedies and action films. Their favorite movie stars are Jean-Claude Van Damme and Arnold Schwarzenegger. Rap is the best music they can imagine. The most awesome comic book hero is Wolverine. The TV programs they most enjoy are Fresh Prince of Bel-Air and In Living Color, both from the United States. But they are convinced the best shows are those which they are not allowed to watch, the ones that air after 10 p.m. They believe definitely it is better to be a boy than to be a girl." All these Canadian kids have, by the way, very liberated parents, politically correct parents. There's something of Norm Peterson, the barstool philosopher from Cheers, in Kevin's makeup. He has a laid-back demeanor and a world-weary sense of humor, this 10-year-old, that often exasperates his family. He frequently assumes a cynical air. This is one of the major qualities of the postmodern consciousness, cynicism. A cynical air. He has no compunction about informing me, for example, that he is not religious and he does not believe in God. Personally, Kevin says, I think it's all bull. Today's 10-year-olds have the soul of stockbrokers. Now, this article in Chantelan is not disapproving of them. They say they're describing, of course, the readers of Chantelan are upper-middle-class women largely, and they usually are married as opposed to the readers of Flair, who would be younger and a little bit lower class in terms of economic standing. John knows the current housing prices in Vancouver and that lawyers earn more money than teachers. Ask him what Wayne Gretzky makes a year playing hockey. He tells you $3 million, which is the number on the nose. Kevin cheerfully follows the box office receipts of movies. Jurassic Park, he informs me, earned $52 million on its first weekend. What I find interesting about this is this formation of the consciousness of the young in terms of what is real and what's important, what preoccupies them. In this particular picture, what's so fascinating is they are groomed to have a certain look, and it's the look of either cynicism or despair. It really is a picture of the joyless economy writ large in the face of a 10-year-old child. Because we're educated, to be this way. We're called, as it says here, yuppie puppies by Nickelodeon. They're Nickelodeon trained. They're worldly and with it and 25 million strong. I was just spending, Kevin says that the most popular music in Canada among 10-year-olds is rap music. You ought to read about rap music. Most of it, in fact, in terms of its image of human life and what image of success actually is. And it's so interesting that it is purely a function of the market rather than, for the most part, artistic skill, although there might be a few rare examples to the contrary. And children are really formed in this in their tastes. They really, these don't come out of our minds. These come in terms of introjected values from the culture. Any channel can deliver eyeballs, but how many can include hearts and minds? This is MTV. I was just watching an hour of MTV here in the Canadian setup of the videos, and it's amazing. Half of them were rap music requested by preteeners. People can watch other channels until they're corny as fog and never be affected, but MTV gets under your skin. How many networks have a generation named after them? Identity formation. The primary identity, not just for the young, but for all of us, is realized in a number of imperatives that our culture of consumerism has. The first imperative is that we must indulge ourselves, and that there must be no limits to us. We have to live, Ralph Lauren says, without boundaries, which is a very interesting ethical proposition. Or you can never be too rich or too thin, a perfect anorexia ad, which I've given a set of these to anorexia people who've been through programs, and this is a very powerful anorexia ad, which a lot of young people actually feel you can never be too rich or too thin. And young people, I've talked to them, actually feel they are fat, only because of introjected imagery. And yet they're thinner than they should be in terms of body weight. We're also informed as the great social activist, the corporation. We now can wear Benetton as a social statement. Our compassion can be reduced to a lapel. Our urgency about life or about love or about AIDS can be reduced to a fashion that we wear in our behinds. Our United Colors of Benetton teaches us about sexuality, the great colors of the spray of condoms that are part of our culture as well. Also, the corporation is our substitute parent, not just our advisor or our social advisor. Nike says, you don't have to be your mother. You don't have to be your grandmother. Be the woman you want to be. But who tells us what kind of woman to be? Who gives us the guidelines? Not the mother, not the grandmother, but it's Nike itself who's telling us we decide after we have introjected their values. And so they say, this is your life, and there are no rules and there are no grades, but there are grades. There are very strict rules about what it means to be acceptable as a woman and to have an acceptable body. These are some of the rules. Your breasts may be too big, too saggy, too pert, too flat, too full, too far apart, too close to A cup, too lopsided, too jiggly, too pale, too padded, too pointy, too pendulous, or just too mosquito bites. They've got everybody there. Every possible person they've got there, there's something wrong with their breasts. In fact, they've convinced many women in the United States, they've built a multi-million-dollar industry convincing women that breast size is a matter of pathology than of beauty. And now we've got this silicone backlash that we're trying to deal with in the United States from a product that women were convinced by images that they had to have in order to be acceptable. But at least you can have the hair that you want. You want a better body? We'll rearrange it for you, the corporation says. And they convince us that our bodies are wrong. These are two actually attractive women. This is what's so paradoxical. If you rub off all the writing they put on their faces, and yet she's supposed to be one big problem, one huge question, the way you look. I teach women who are 22 years old who still believe they're ugly when all the people in the class think they're attractive. They believe they're ugly. They really do. Glamour magazine had a poll for women asking them, what's the most attractive part of your body? Do you know what was number one? Women's feet. It's because they haven't attacked your feet yet. Once they can convince you that if your feet aren't right, nothing matters, like if your hair isn't right, nothing matters, then our feet no longer will be acceptable as well. So we need this massive technology. She looks like she's being attacked by Scud missiles to change the way we look. The other way that we're formed in terms of the rules of the commodity culture is that every legitimate human value is projected into a product. My students some of them had a hard time seeing this until some of my basketball team students went to Moscow for a game one time, and they came back and they said, this is before the wall came down. They said, they have these huge signs that propagandize people. They say truth is the state, freedom is the party. And they said, we realize we've got the same signs. They're all over the place. It's the truth is a cigarette though. And freedom is a panty liner. It's something that we can buy. And so you can buy happiness. The happiness hair coloring. You can buy joy. There's only one joy, the costliest perfume in the world. Unless it's your bottle of vodka, your absolute joy. You can buy life in a box. We eat it. We consume it. We package self-confidence, self-esteem in our soap, body and soul, spirit, peace of mind in our motor oil, sharing and caring in our cologne, true freedom, hero. You want to be See, what's interesting, it's amazing how many young guys at first say, we're not influenced by that. Then you ask them what they buy. It was an article in Advertising Age about 6 years ago said, in the United States, men do not need any more products. Even poor men don't. What they need is self-acceptance. And so I saw a group of advertisers on television saying, we are going to dedicate ourselves to helping men find an identity. Because they don't need a shirt. They need acceptance as a man. They need to feel that they're a hero or feel that they're a boss. Because it's the magic of imagery, the magic of commodities. Marx said you have to go to the mist-enveloped regions of religion to understand commodities. They're like God. The poetry of possession. It's the real thing in the back of your mind, what you're hoping to find. Coca-Cola. And it's an interesting thing. You remember when Coca-Cola went off the market, the classic Coke? It was very interesting. My brother was in publicity for a while, and he came in, and I thought he was crazy. He said, John, this is a hoax. This was when they first did it. He said, this is a hoax. And I said, what do you mean? He said, they're going to bring it back. I said, no, they're going to lose too much money. In 6 months' time, they brought it back. People were buying up all these old Cokes. And you know what the head, this guy's name is Guizpia or Guizpezia. He's got a Hispanic name in the United States, the president of Coke. When he brought it back in September, after 6 months, he said, we at Coke had no idea of the depth of your relationship to our product. So we are bringing it back under public demand. It's the real thing, what you're hoping to find. Imagery is one of the most powerful ways to communicate. That's what liturgy, for example, is. It uses images. Great powerful things that can move the spirit. This image, for example, is one of the most powerful in the world. People have recognized this man in Santiago, Chile. They've recognized him in Zimbabwe, Johannesburg, Bombay, Hong Kong. They recognize him everywhere that I've shown this place. And the thing is, the image is so powerful you don't even need the product. Now, what's interesting about Marlboro, if any of you are in your 50s, you remember when Marlboro first came out. When I first started smoking, I was in 6th grade. And you couldn't catch a boy dead smoking a Marlboro. We smoked Camels and Luckies because we wanted to be macho. And Marlboro was considered a woman's cigarette in 1954. Well, Leo Burnett was hired by Philip Morris. This is one of the most successful advertising campaigns in history. And they didn't change the product at all. You know, we always say, I go for the product and for quality. Baloney. They didn't change it at all. They didn't change the design or the package. They came out with the Marlboro Man with tattoos. Teenagers, 13 and 14, were wearing tattoos in a year's time. By the time I was a junior in high school, Marlboro was the fastest-selling cigarette among adolescent males. More males smoked Marlboro than any cigarette in the world. They changed the behavior of millions only on images. Notice it's a behavior that's directly related to, in the United States, 380,000 deaths a year. This behavior, the power of imagery. Cigarettes are so magical. Even though those of you who smoke know it gives you bad breath, that's atrocious, they make it look romantic. Kissing sweet. Where for women who in 1968 started smoking more in the United States, an interesting reason why, that was right after the first cancer scares of 64, men started dropping off. They have to get new people to smoke. And what are the two great themes of women's cigarettes? Any of you have an idea? Well, that's right. One of them, of course, is women's liberation. And that's very interesting how that works. You come a long way, baby. The other one is thinness. If you look at women's cigarettes, look at the titles, how many are thins, called thins, slims, super thins, and super slims. They're smoking a diet. They're smoking an image. It has nothing to do with taste. And last year in the United States, for the first time in history, fatalities from lung cancer surpassed fatalities for breast cancer for women. They came a long way. So what are you going to do with all these fatalities? It's about 10,000 a week that die, 10,000 smokers or ex-smokers that die in the United States. Who are you going to get to smoke? You use imagery. If you look at this for a second, who do you think is being appealed to here? Yes, children. What particular kind of children? It's especially boys, young preteen boys. But it appeals to all children. Harvard ran a study that found that children between the ages of 8 and 11 recognize Joe Camel and associate it with cigarettes more easily than they recognize the Disneyland logo. This is very powerful imagery. Another thing to reflect upon about it is not just the fast car and the fast girl, but if you look at Joe Camel, it's a cartoon. Just sit back and look upon it if you were, let's say, a designer or you were a cartoonist. What does that nose all about? Any ideas on why that? Because a camel doesn't look like that. I just checked one out this summer. They look nothing like that. What does it look like? Any idea? You're probably all too decent to know what it looks like. As one of my very, very wise women students said, that is one well-hung camel. You've got a strongly genitalized cartoon. Now, I'd like you to think about something. Before Joe Camel came out in 1989, out of every 100 packs of Camel sold, one was bought by a teenager. One. Last year, out of every 100 packs of Camels, 30 of them were bought by teenagers. And I tell teenagers, you tell me you're not influenced. Imagery is immensely powerful. The most basic kind of imagery in consumerism is the erosion of the person and the exaltation of the object. So things become substitute people. It sees, it feels, it walks, it talks, and it can have babies too. Our products are our new infants. Congratulations at the Sony, 7 pounds, 11 ounces. It says you'll love the feel of a Sony on your tummy. The new family member with a great set of genes. Your substitute absent father, world's greatest dad. Your absent friend. These are very interesting. They belong to a set of addiction ads, but I have these two because they also relate to the personalization of objects. Toilet paper. Notice the baby strategically placed. As one psychiatrist, there was a group of psychologists and psychiatrists watching this, and they said, you know, it is interesting. As in the United States especially, we are less and less inclined to give the kind of attention and comfort and solace, or physical attention, or cleaning, or helping a wounded person. But an automobile, we do this for. This immense amount of affection portrayed for objects. I mean, this is an act of compassion. She bought an automobile. I bought it because it looked like it needed me, for Pete's sake. And it's better than certainly a laborer. This never asks for a raise or lunches, or never complains, never calls in sick, never has a bad weekend. The systematization of the degrading of the laborer as well as part of this. It has a great personality. It comes with conscience. It's not just a car, it's an aphrodisiac. Infinity, nice name for a car. Gold earrings, listen to this woman in Vogue. This is the great liberated Vogue woman. Gold earrings were not what I had in mind, but when I shop, I sort of wonder. And pretty soon I was in the jewelry department, and all of a sudden I saw them. It was almost like I couldn't look away. They zapped me right in the eye. Well, what else can you do? I tried them on, of course. And I loved them, of course, and I just bought them. Get this. I can't explain how really right it felt to do that. This is her first major ethical act of the week. She's buying earrings. How exactly right. And now every time I look at them, I get the same sort of happy charge again. Just as strong and just as good as ever. This is her lover. Before I chose my husband, I chose my dishes. You don't need a new light. You just need a new shampoo. Nothing fills your life like Clinique. The passion for possessions. This is an article that I saved from Cosmopolitan a number of years ago, but it's so interesting how it reveals this problem. Notice what she says. This is not a criticism. This is the Cosmo woman. She says, what I really cherish about possessions is their extremely unhuman quality of immutability. Lovers grow cold. Spouses wrinkle. Children move away. So she's talking about the betrayal of person. And then she says, even strong emotions rarely last, but possessions do. There may be no joy more intense than seeing an object you love and possessing it immediately. All that you can truly possess is, in fact, things. As we've heard a boring number of times, a child is only lent. If you clutch a loved one too closely, they might disappear. Bear down too hard on a task and you're in trouble. But there's no need to hold back with possessions. Clasp a sensuous soft cashmere as tightly as you like. It will never walk out on you. Now this occurs in a culture that has been systemically unraveling relationships between men and women. The erosion of community, the erosion of civil life. Time magazine has just written, New York Times has just written 3 articles Sunday on the erosion of civility, of a sense of community, of responsibility, and isolationism. And then the erosion of covenants, of community, of family, of marriages. While this is going on, we look for meaningful relationships. I'm looking for a meaningful relationship, she says. And read the top line. And I found it at Saks Fifth Avenue. And the second line is even better, because only they have real clothes. That ought to surprise you who are sitting here without Saks Fifth Avenue clothes. You're in the nude. And the thing is, a lot of kids believe this. My niece told me a number of years ago, she asked me why I didn't wear designer clothes, and I just said, oh, I don't have time, it costs too much. She said, well, Uncle Johnny, designer clothes are the only real clothes. A man in New York told me his 9-year-old daughter insisted on Jordache jeans for Christmas. And he priced them, they were $58, and he said, listen, he was out of a job at the time, he said, we can't afford it, we'll get you some Levi's or Lee's. And he said, my 9-year-old looks at me with these beady eyes. She's like these 10-year-olds here. And she says, forget it. I don't want anything. So he saved up. They got her the Jordache. He said he brought her to school and he realized they have cliques based upon this. You are only acceptable if you have these. This is an identity formation we're talking about. Because our clothes are magical. Notice what Nike who says you're free, you be who you want to be. We expect great things from our clothes. No, we demand them. If they don't live up to them, they sit in our closet sad and unused and so unpopular. Good clothes make us feel good. They love our hips and our waists. They do not laugh at us behind our back. They never snicker. Our clothes, our social legitimization. We can fall in love without paying the price. It makes no demands on you, as opposed to who? Toyota, I love what you do for me. It's like love, she says. No, maybe it's like marriage. Face it, love is all about this immediate rush, and that's not what love is about. If anybody has a brain, they know that's not what love is about. And that's why she can say, which is how you feel when you buy some gorgeous little blouse. That's what love is about. We are all the things you are. Saks Fifth Avenue. Notice, if that's true, Saks owns us. They own us. And then we buy our identity. I find myself in the McCall's catalog. I find myself in a Bali bra. Or I buy my U bra. I get up in the morning, put on my U-bra, then you slip on your easy-to-be-me pantyhose, and then you spray on me, unless you're French-Canadian, you buy c'est moi, and then you're me all over. And the men have the same problem. We don't know where our being stops and our products take hold, because our assets are our being. You are your assets. This is a Freudian delight, this ad, by the way. Bloomingdale's. End your identity crisis forever. Sure, you're proud of the many things you've done in life, but there's still room to make a statement about who you are. Self-discovery. Freud would love this one too. Self-discovery. True love, time says. In other words, we are what we eat, what we build, and what we buy. This is the decentered human. There is no internal identity. The center does not hold. Things fall apart. And this is part of the cultural expression of the deconstruction of personal life. It is a new religion, too. The religion, however, has eliminated transcendence, and it has become the commodity matrix. Her Bible, 17 says, is your bonanza, the corporation. Because she believes in us, she'll believe in you. And so transcendence is in our Dior, or the man in search of the absolute. I'm proud to announce my new fragrance, eternity, now and forever. Say amen, somebody. Amen. How to possess the supernatural. A diamond is forever. And so you remember what used to be called the three theological virtues? They still are, but not many people know what they are. The three theological virtues are considered the very life of God in us. And that when we exercise our faith in each other, or love each other, or have hope in each other, we are doing the most divine thing. That's why they're called theological. With these virtues, faith has been transformed into Calvin Klein. And you have hope cosmetics. But the greatest of these is musk. Musk is eternal. Musk is love. And so what we have is a very appropriate cultural situation. This nation asks us, where is our God? But our God is transcendent. So they have made their own gods out of silver and gold, the products of human hands. And these gods have mouths but do not speak, lips that do not speak, eyes that do not see, and hands that do not touch. They're not personal. And then it says, and all those who trust the idol become like the idol. We become like the impersonal God, the Quad Almighty. This was given to me by a woman student over 20 years ago. It's very, when credit cards are first coming out, but it's very prophetic. She commented, notice how all the people are like ants. And these products are huge. They're like icons, or they're like monoliths. What gives at Christmas? And so the new Jehovah, the new Jove, the new Jovan corporation creates a new generation of male and female. That male is created by the corporation. This product is called male. It was by a French designer. He was paid $78,000 for it. He says he made it directly, as many designers do, into a phallus symbol. This is the female symbol, the genitalized product. And it says what man wants from woman and woman wants from man, we have created. Let us recreate them in our own image and likeness, the corporation says. The new Adam and new Eve, according to Benetton. The woman seductress, the snake and the apple, open pants and open shirt. The new Adam and new Eve from Ebony magazine. The African American people as original as sin. And the new look of the male and female. These children, I still think of that young 9-year-old girl that won at Jordache. I mean, look at their faces. It's just amazing. Just look at these models and what they're communicating. There's a lack of mutuality. There's use. There's hostility. There's the cynical expression of life. And they're supposed to become these people. The same look. A little more eroticized. That same suspicion in their eyes.
the same unfocused relationship. And it's there because in the relationship, in much of the consumer culture, you do not have imagery of men and women capable of relating to each other. I watched, for example, most of today, not only since it was raining, because I like to find out what's going on, the number of channels in Canada. If you look at soap operas, you'll find out that men and women are never faithful to each other. They're never happy with each other. The only time people are happy are during commercials. Think about it. That's the only time they're ecstatic during commercials, and we're incapable of relationship. Now, what's going on here is imaged in this surreal ad from Rolling Stone magazine, and also a number of college magazines in the United States. It's for Budweiser. You can see this African-American man looking down at this bottle cap here. I wish I had this ad. I gave this talk about 5 years ago in Manhattan, and there were 4 advertisers that responded to it. And they all agreed that my analysis of what they call American culture was correct. They just said, we don't cause it. And I don't think they cause it totally either. It's a much more complex thing. Every culture's got its problems with dehumanization. But they said, we're just a mirror of culture. And I said, no, you tamper with the mirror. You focus the mirror. And if I would have had this ad, I could have shown them pictorially. Look into this picture. The woman is embracing the man, right? In the mirror of advertising behind the bar, the mirror, you see the new lover. She's embracing now straight above the bottle of Budweiser. The new lover is the commodity. It's a commodity fetish. You know how Freud describes a fetish? A fetish is a phenomenon where people relate sexually better to things than to the other person. In some way, pornography is a form of fetishism. Elizabeth McKenna, the great lawyer who's a radical feminist, has been writing about this in the States. It's a form of fetish because it must turn the person into an object. Well, this is a fetish from Sports Illustrated. And not just women have fetishes. He's totally in love. Bijan, I'm in love with Bijan. Very interesting ad, by the way. I'm not going to interpret this ad. You're going to think I'm a dirty old priest. Notice the design. In a day in which it's most unfashionable to smoke, they have stuck a cigar in her mouth, and she's in love with it. Chanel, the love object. Donna Karan, this year. These are very strong genitalized objects. These are fragrances by Donna Karan. Let Givenchy hug you, the corporation. The fetishism of underwear with Calvin Klein. Of clothes. Hugo Boy. It says, few things will make you want to take them off. The woman has no clothes on. He's got his pants on. Sports Illustrated. Sunglasses. Now, women ought to really feel great about this. She says, only if you promise to keep your sunglasses on. And we wonder why sex is trivialized in this culture. Tennis shoes. Fox appeal. And the great sexualized object in our culture is alcohol. It's a very paradoxical thing because you're probably aware that the major non-organic cause of sexual dysfunction in the United States is the overconsumption of alcohol. And what's so paradoxical is, other than social acceptability, the dominant theme of alcohol, all alcohol adds, is that it is sexual fulfillment in the object. These two appear in a series of 25 ads that I have, the students have given me, all for Seagrams. They all have foreplay in the bottom portion of their ads. And they describe your first drink as if it's your first sexual experience. Everything they say about it is true. They say you should do it with someone you know well. It turns a maybe into an again. The sexualization of alcohol is a very powerful theme across the board. I'll see if I can find where I put this. I'm going to be stuck without to follow it around. Know where to go. I got so distracted when I got my drink. Thank you very much. This is a perfect example. This is absolutely a brilliant ad if you see it in its original. Absolutely beautiful composition. And that's all they have. There's no other copy. And so you have the artist, the interpreter, the media has turned the woman into the bottle, even though he's looking at the bottle in the distance. The woman has become the receptacle. The woman is the bottle. The bottle has become the woman. An absolute. The bottleization of gender. I drink Johnny Walker. You never forget your first girl. By the way, St. Pauli girls, the sales after the 1 year, the first year of this ad, comparing your first girl to your first beer, it shot up 104%. Secret love in your Guinness. Great stuff, this bath. Feel the Velvet, one of the most successful of the Hubline Corporation lines. It's made millions off of this feminization of alcohol. Simpatico beer, the bottle strategically placed. A good club soda is like a good woman. It won't quit on you. Budweiser. So we have, what I'm suggesting is that you have the objectification of femininity. The women become the billboard. In fact, it's interesting how much men and women now have become walking billboards. We pay Calvin Klein to advertise for them. I had a teacher when I was in secondary school that was related, that knew Marshall McLuhan very well, and he asked us, because they used to pay people to wear advertisements, walk down the street, and he said, do you think they could ever manipulate us so that we would pay them to wear their advertisement? We all said, oh, it's impossible, we'd never do it. In fact, I've done this with high school kids. 5 years ago, I talked to some high school kids, and I said, do you think they'll ever get men to wear earrings? They said, no, impossible, they never will. All you got to do is see it. It's all orchestrated. If they can get us to wear 10 earrings and 5 nose rings and 7 swatches, they'd be happy, because time and beauty has nothing to do with it. Image has everything to do with it. And in this case, the image of the woman as a sexual product, as a commercial gender. That's why the most preeminent entertainer product in our culture, it has genitalized her sexuality. Madonna is the preeminent expression of the woman as commodity, Marky Mark as the male sexualized commodity. Or we have the full relationship of this in the breaking down then of mutuality in sexual relationships. What I'm suggesting is, once you totally commodify gender and sexuality, you no longer have vivid expressions of tenderness, of mutuality, and of love. This Calvin Klein man, for example, looks like he's in love, but he's looking at himself. And so we market egoist. If you, even 5 years ago, if you called a man an egoist, he'd be insulted. Now you give it to him for Christmas. And I suppose he gives you narcissist. I am narcissist. The narcissist male, the self-involved male, the self-involved male, Calvin Klein, the self-involved male, macho musk oil is mucho macho. The American male, cut up at the chin, no brains, open to the waist. And he's got his macho in his hand. And the male-female relationship becomes immensely paradoxical then, because it can only be objectified. And so men and women are portrayed as relating to each other as sexual objects. Now, this occurs not only in these almost bizarre things of a basketball player's personal existence. This says how to tell your men apart in the dark. The only is you and Yardley. The male-female relationship becomes strong in its themes of use and of obsession. There's 3 men in this ad with 1 woman. Calvin Klein sport. Look at it for a second. 2 men, fully clothed in a park, 1 woman between them. What's the theme? Rape is a very strong theme in high fashion. And it's so interesting because we're so messed up, especially in the United States, on the signals we're giving to our young. And rape, of course, the essence of rape is that it's violence because it treats a person as if she's a thing. That's sadism is precisely that. If any of you read the Toronto Sunday paper, there was an article here that I just mentioned, "The Lean, Mean Enlightenment Sex Machine." And the writer talks about a nonfiction book that's brought up by a woman that I can't quite make out her name. If I could find my glasses, I probably could. Her name is Crossland. She says, "I'm not surprised by the popularity of the Sod. Everywhere people are preoccupied with sex and violence. People's tastes are rather crude. Publishers feel they can only sell books if there's lots." Notice there's not one judgment about that being screwed up. Maybe, but as Crossland suggests, you'd never know from popular culture. The extreme pursuit of sexual gratification seems to lead inevitably, Madonna videos are the latest evidence, to sadomasochistic hijinks. And Sade certainly showed the way. A number of times he was imprisoned for whipping and beating prostitutes. His writings describe in revolting, voluminous detail every conceivable aberration, but with a decided accent on torture. Under these circumstances, it's understandable that some hail Sade as a pioneer, a prophet who glimpsed the promised land of our current permissive society, but who, like a Moses of debauchery, was not permitted to enter therein. This is from the Toronto Sunday paper. What I'm suggesting is there are strong themes of the woman as aggressor. And that's why so many men think women want it. We're told this all the time. Listen to the music. He's fighting her off with his Jordache. Request jeans. Banana Republic. Calvin Klein. The Guess woman. Notice the girl, the innocent, the Lolita, the available seductress. Obsession. Again, notice the anorexic, skinny kind of girl-like. She's one of the rages now in terms of modeling for Calvin Klein. But it's the passivity, okay, we're talking about, which leads to aggression. Anytime, any place, anywhere. These are all from this past month, these ads. And so Guess has built its empire on the seduction of women. It's amazing for the last 6 years. The woman seduced in the backseat of an automobile. The only reason you'd know this is from Mademoiselle, an advertisement, is if you look in the middle, you'll see the lapel of her pocket. It says Guess on it. A lot of these ads are very subtle. Guess jeans, the woman seduced by an older man. The woman broken. George Marciano is the owner of Guess jeans, by the way. He and his brother immigrated from Paris and from Tel Aviv about 15 years ago. They bought out a lot of Jordache, and they're still in litigation now fighting over the jeans. They've made hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. George Marciano. Look at the woman's face. Clearly she's been resisting on one side. Clearly she's hurt. The woman seduced by an older woman. Guess jeans. The woman is prostitute. These are the themes that the Toronto Star is talking about. The woman is seductress and temptress. Guess, George Marciano. The broken woman. This is this past year. I mean, it looks like she's just been hurt. She's against this tree, and you only see the owner and then the inverted triangle, Guess. And so the themes of the Sod become high fashion and acceptable. This is from Vogue magazine less than a year ago, Canadian edition as well. It says, making a virtue out of vice. Newton, which is Helmut Newton, there was an article about Helmut Newton, who is one of the highest paid fashion photographers in the world. His books are only on sadism. Is known for his playful peeks at subjects like gambling and bondage. And so he had this theme of the woman strapped. Newton's fascination with the darker side of life becomes the virtue now that once was a vice. The woman as the object about to shoot herself in the head. Chic or cruel, the New York Times said about 7 months ago. Gianni Versace styles take a cue from the world of S&M. Some women say it makes them feel powerful. Others find it demeaning. No judgment, though. And so we can market Kick It with images like this. Swatch magazine with images of women bound. Designer clothes. rock music. What I'm suggesting is that I believe, although this is an edited presentation of advertising, I'm presenting these as powerful themes in much of advertising in our culture. And I believe it is an aggressive revelation of the human person. It's a transvaluation of values. It's a decentering of the person. It's a revolution of consciousness. Notice even the language of aggression that this advertising brochure says. Audio weaponry, guerrilla humor, tactical warfare, capturing clients, the healthy whack. It is a world, this is a great deconstruction ad, it's a world of this disorder. Notice not only are all their clothes disordered, and they buy them this way. I gave a talk to young women, by the way, about 6 months ago, graduating class at high school, and this young African-American woman, she was so great, she came up afterwards, she said, I'm a perfect fool. She said, I'm a perfect ass. And I said, what do you mean? She says, I know why I bought these jeans with holes in them a year ago. I spent a week's salary on it, and I never worn them. It's all been drummed into me, and she had never even worn them. And it's this disorder that becomes the order of consciousness. It says, experience disorder. Get rid of the mainstream. But the problem is, as Mike Tyson said, he said, I am as normal as anybody. I'm just more normal. The mainstream is disorder. And the inversion of values, as Nietzsche calls it, the transformation of values. Now it is lust instead of love. Now it's power instead of sharing. Pardon me, instead of service. Now it's money. Now it's lust. As Nike says, the middle paragraph, lust isn't a sin, it's a necessity. Greed, an epigram for our time. This is from M Magazine, a man's magazine. Upper middle class, higher class fashion magazine. I want, therefore I am. And damn it, I'm bloody well going to get it now. And again, the magazine does not criticize it. It describes the consciousness of the postmodern culture that has a powerful effect upon the poor. I know in my part of St. Louis where I live, which is a poor part of town, the only thing on the streets are billboards for alcohol and drug and for cigarettes. And it also demoralizes the rich. After all, what kind of person could this ad appeal to? This appeared in Town and Country. For the price of a small house, you can own this extraordinary chair. Demoralize thy neighbor. Beat thy neighbor. Sip it with arrogance. Living well is the best revenge. Consume them. I propose that what happens in the radical uncentering of the person in relationship in our personal lives, we find our personal existence consumed, that we sense a loss of our interior citadel, our interior dignity, our intrinsic value, because this is going to be, as I'll suggest tomorrow, one of the dominant themes of postmodern ethos. There is no intrinsic value in a person. You are only what you eat, what you produce, what you consume. And then you're worthless if you're not doing those things. And that, call in Dr. Kevorkian when you get worthless, or when the pain's too great, or when you feel like the pain's too great, but don't try to deal with the wounds of human life, because your being is wrapped up in consuming. That first level of consumption. The second thing is the consumed relationship, the loss of mutuality. We had a man, Lynn Knopfsinger, who died, who was the campaign advisor for President Bush. When he died of cancer, he said, I finally realized that this culture is based upon power and money and prestige. And he says, I'd give anything in my life to have time with people I love, because we feel consumed in the mutuality of our relationships, consumed by the demands of culture. And finally, the third dimension of our personal existence that is consumed is compassion for other nations, other people, the homeless, the alien, people of a different kind, people of a different class, a different coloration. In many ways, this individualism of consumption leads us to believe that anybody who is other than we are a threat to what we are. Obviously, they're a threat to our being, because if I have to share, I lose my being. And so what I'd like to suggest then in this you might say, the dark side, rather than before I try to go into the reconstruction of personal life tomorrow, that I'd like at least to be aware of the dynamics that are operative at a certain level of cultural consciousness. I think it affects the 10-year-old guys in Toronto. I think it affects also all of us. I think it affects men and women who fear retirement because they think they'll lose their value when they're no longer pulling down a paycheck. I think it affects many of us who feel that we will no longer produce, we have nothing left to give, although all the love of our life we can still give away. So I think if we're sitting through this so long, we're going to have an initial, see if we can turn the lights on. You can see it back there. An initial response to maybe represent not only one person's, one professional's estimation, but also to lead.
Before we open up the floor to your comments and questions, I'd like to ask Dr. Bob Lake, who teaches in our Department of Public Relations here at the university, to briefly react to Father's presentation. Bob?
I will be brief in a couple of comments. I agree with the point that the United States should be not thought of as a country, but as a state of mind. Some of you who knew George Grant at Dalhousie will recognize this point already. I will disagree with Dr. Kavanaugh because I think he's been a little bit hard on the United States and a little bit soft on Canada. I can't really see anything that is represented in his view of the United States that you Canadians, and I'm a Canadian, are not familiar here. And I think sometimes, he's a guest here, so he's been courteous to Canada. I think we sometimes like to say, oh yeah, this is terrible, but it's all the fault of the of the American media. Frankly, I think the Canadian media would do this if they could just beat the American media out. Secondly, he said that he was painting a somewhat gloomy picture. I would disagree. I think he has painted a picture that's not gloomy enough. Specifically, in the next a few years in homes around Canada, there will be a massive onslaught of stuff on your television that makes this, however gloomy this appear, a bit like Mary Poppins. And I mean, the stuff with fiber optics, direct broadcast satellites, etc., that can be brought into the homes is seriously going to make this picture, however gloomy it is, far worse. Something else that will make it far worse is that the speaker quite rightly focused on advertisements, but advertisers are in fact moving beyond advertisements. And I don't know what you want to call this, but nowadays if you're watching television, particularly films, you do not see advertisements. You see the junk embedded right in the film. So nobody is going to invest 10 or 15 or $20 million in a movie nowadays unless they have worked out the commercial deals. And so I don't care what the movie is. A major decision about whether the hero is going to drink Coke or Pepsi is as important as the casting for the financing of the movie. And this is why I say the picture is going to get worse, because here at least you had a shot at separating the ad from the other. That is less and less true. And a final point, and I'll be off your back. Some of you may have seen 60 Minutes this past week, and they're talking about what I call a boutique broadcaster. It's an organization that puts 12 minutes of news into classrooms around the United States. This comes free to the schools. They get the equipment free, except, of course, the children must watch the 12 minutes of news, and the television is monitored so that the kids do watch it. And, of course, the reason it comes free is because it is supported by commercial things, so that in the past, at least you thought when you sent your kids to school that was sort of a break away from it. Dr. Kavanaugh has pointed out that somebody sitting at home is going to watch an awful lot of advertisements. If things keep going the way they are, they're going to go to school and watch the advertisements. And the danger of this is kids don't pay much attention to their parents, so maybe they aren't watching the ads at home. Send them to school and give them marks. They'll watch the ads for sure. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Bob. Father Kavanaugh has agreed to respond to any comments or questions you might have. I want you to note that there's a microphone in the center aisle there. In order to be heard, I would ask you to present yourselves at the microphone, please. Thank you, Father.
Thank you, Dr. Lake. Appreciate your comments.
Father, it's my dubious pleasure to familiarize you with the circumstances of our situation here in Nova Scotia and in Canada. The situation in Canada, in my estimation, is even more serious than it is in the United States. And that, I base that on this particular fact. During the last 10 months, there was a young 14-year-old girl named Virginie in Quebec who had her sister was raped. And as a result of that, in consequence of it, she tried to resolve her grief by distributing a petition throughout Canada for the reduction of violence in TV by legislation. Over 1.5 million citizens signed that petition. Here in Nova Scotia, I was the convener of that petition, and we have 13,000 signatures on it. I think during the last 9 months I've worked with that petition, and I think the most awesome and discouraging thing about the whole thing was the fact that the establishment has known for over 25 years the effect of violence on society and has done nothing, and we as lay people are just learning it now through our children and the pain that they are suffering. I think I say it's more serious here in Canada because of our attitude. We are not an aggressive, assertive people. We're very apathetic and find it very difficult to assert ourselves and to demand our rights. And because of this, we've put up with this, and we are continuing to put up with this. Another example of this, that despite the publicity related to this particular topic, we now have a federal well, I've lost the word now because I'm very emotional about this subject. But none of the major parties seem fit to address this during this election. They have denied the fact that this was even of an interest to the general public. And it's interesting, too, also, that in a debate with one of our local federal MPs, the name given to the increased number of satellites to Canada in terms of the number of programs that are coming in are given by our government the name of Death Stars. And when I tried to find out more about why they called it Death Stars, I called Senator Paul Simon's office in the States to ask about it because the Canadian politicians wouldn't explain it to me. And when I called Senator Paul Simon's office in Washington, they had never heard of it. And I think it's very interesting that that name came from the federal government. And it wasn't from the states. But my feeling is they're called Death Stars because of the effect and the fear that's going to come to the economy of Canada if they decrease violence on TV. They'll not be able to compete with America in terms of the types of programming that will be brought into Canada. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. I must say I humbly disagree a little bit with it, but I really appreciate your urgency about this, and I believe also, there's nothing like the human spirit. And I've seen people in the most crushing of circumstances resist. And I see much more of the human spirit all the times I've come up to Canada than you say. Maybe the question is, how can we re-engage our imaginations so that people will take more direction of their life in their own hands? And I think part of it is
an education system like this. I mean, we're not perfect, but we got to realize what we're involved in is deprogramming. Authentic education is deprogramming. And I think men and women, especially young people, appreciate that. They don't like to be manipulated. They don't like to be made a fool out of. And some of this, what you're talking about, it reveals us as being lapdogs. And I think men and women are empowered. Not only that, I believe they're empowered by individual people. Part of this ideology is to depress you or us so that we feel we can do nothing. Then they've totally succeeded because a thing does nothing. A human is an agent. A human is an agent of revolution, the revolution of love, of commitment. And the thing is, if we only got in touch with our resources as men and women and do not allow ourselves to be convinced that we're passive and we can't do anything. I appreciate your activism on us, and I'm saying don't give up. The other thing is personal contact with people. I was telling the people at L'Arche in Wolfville yesterday, there's nothing like a committed man or woman who is not on the make. We know what happens when a man or woman's on the make or on the take, and how it ruins people's hopes, how it crushes expectations. But a man or woman of integrity is an immensely powerful thing. And I think we've got to realize this and aspire to it, and when we fail, aspire to it once again. The case I gave as a woman, okay, listen, the reason I don't think it's worse up here, I live in the mean streets of St. Louis. It's something. And I lived in New York last year teaching, and there's something much worse going on. But out of the mean streets of St. Louis, a young pregnant girl, 15 years old, comes into a midwife at a city hospital who was a friend of mine. She was a nun. And she was 5 months pregnant and didn't even know she was pregnant. And the midwife says, well, I got news for you, honey. You're pregnant, and you're going to have a baby in about 4 months' time. And there was no boy, no parents. She didn't know she was pregnant. She didn't know how she got pregnant. She didn't even know sex. She just did it since she was 9. Probably never got pregnant because she was so physically unhealthy. Finally, it took. The midwife says, well, I'll tell you what. You come in 3 times a week for an hour before you have that baby, and I'll talk with you and tell you what it's like to have a baby, and I'll get you prepared and get you on a diet, and I'll be with you when you have the baby, and I'll show you how to be a mother to it, how to nurse a baby and clean it, and you come as long as you want. So that girl from the mean streets with nobody, a total victim of the bleakness of the worst parts of culture, she came. She had the baby. 6 months she attended to this woman. This woman was met with her, and finally she disappeared with her 6-month-old baby. We didn't know what happened. 6 years later, I get a call from the midwife. She says, guess who I heard from? She knew so many people like this, and it was this girl. And she said, listen to this. She read me this invitation. And the girl said, I'm sorry for never coming back to you. I just decided I was going to wait till I surprised you. She had just gotten her practical nursing degree. And she said, I'm inviting you because you're the only person who loved me. I want to be like you. All of the trash of culture. I mean, Sakharov knew this in Russia. Out of Russia, great souls, great spirits rise. And we can't be demoralized in this regard. There's nothing, and that's why a young person who sees the truth and who loves what is good is such a wonderful sign of life. And so although I agree with the struggle that you're saying, don't give up hope on this. Because people really do respond to the human heart. It's just that what happens notice what happens. If we have less and less contact with our parents, less and less time for friendship, less and less time for people, then we lose the major source of information in the world, the living person, the greatest information system there is. But I'm sorry for ranting on. Anything that you'd like to bring up?
Thank you, Father Kavanaugh, for your excellent social analysis. I represent Media Watch in the Maritimes. Media Watch is a national organization that monitors the portrayal of women in the media. And I often go around and do talk similar to yours and look at ads. Mm-hmm. And the response is very similar. one of the things that Media Watch tries to do in Canada is to invite people to respond to ads when they're feeling as though they disagree with what's being presented to them. And we encourage and support people to write letters to the advertisers or to national organizations such as the Canadian Advertising Foundation, because ultimately if we can play their game too of consumerism, and we can say, no, we're not going to take this anymore, and we're not going to buy your product, or find a better, more creative way of presenting this product if you feel it's so good. Interestingly, the Canadian Advertising Foundation, when Media Watch and other organizations said, no, we're going to legislate how you can advertise or not advertise, they said, oh, no, we don't want legislation. We'll develop our own guidelines. And so they developed, among other things, the sex role stereotyping guidelines, which we're very concerned about. And they recently asked for some revisions to it. And one of the things that we suggested was a phone-in line, because people won't write letters, and they have become very picky as to what they'll respond to or not. You have to write a letter, otherwise they won't pay any attention to you. And it has to be, can't be photocopied, and they have all these rules that say we'll recognize your response to our ad. Anyway, they have all these rules. So anyway, we submitted a number of suggestions to them, and hopefully they'll listen to us. But the Canadian Advertising Foundation's board of directors that looks after their guidelines, among other things, are made up of people who are not enlightened, who are not aware that these images are damaging to our spirits and our souls and our bodies and our minds and so on. And so it's a real struggle to educate people that these things really matter. But anyway, I just encourage people to take action in their own lives, to feel empowered to make a difference, that it is possible.
Thank you. And I think it's important to support places like Media Watch, and there's one in the United States, Media and Values. And I don't know if any of you have seen the magazine called Ad Busters. It's a fascinating thing, and they got young kids working for it too. Young kids do their mock ads, and some of them are chilling, what some of the younger people, artists, come up with. It's a very good, interesting publication as well. Anyone else? On this, by the way, I don't know if Jacques Goulet brought, we had some information about like a 45-minute presentation that some teachers wanted to use it in the classrooms, that some company in St. Louis has put together that's got some music on that, but it's not quite as raw as this presentation, but it's pretty much serviceable for classrooms. If any of you might be interested, you could see Jacques. Yes?
Thank you, Father. Generally, I agree with much of the analysis that you present here in your presentation. I'm a teacher and a returning student. I've been out of the university community for quite a few years now. And one of the theoretical, I guess, I don't want to call it a trend, a theoretical movement I think I'm encountering in my studies in education is the whole impact of feminism on the way we think about what we do in schools. It seems to me, if I was listening carefully, that the only real reference, or the only reference I hear you making explicitly to the women's movement was somewhat derisive in terms of talking about some imagined liberation of women as portrayed in these ads that you show. It seems to me in my thinking that perhaps a way out of the kind of world that's presented, that you present in your slides, is by us paying us men, because after all, this world that you're describing here is a creation of males, rich males, white males, well-positioned males.
There are a lot of women that want a big part of it.
Well, I wonder if, well, okay, this is my question. I'd like you to comment on what you see as the role. No, but capitalism is largely a male project, I think. And most of
I mentioned, stay there, but I mentioned Catherine McKinnon, actually. I think she's a very well worth listening to, but a lot of feminists, they got a big debate going on in feminism between women's positions on pornography, and it clusters around issues of capitalism. And in fact, Catherine McKinnon thinks the model for pornography in Canada is a much better thing than the United States, because Canada at least has a fair treatment clause in the way it deals with pornography. But I think what's the problem of this, capitalism is so powerful, it co-opted the countercultural movement. It co-opted it, 90% of it. And it's co-opting much of feminism. And I'm willing to take evidence to the contrary, but if feminism comes down to having control, even though I can abuse myself and be abused, if I can have control and dominance, what they've done is they have brought the pathology of masculinization. Because what happens, dominance, control, instead of calling out from men, what we must acknowledge in our own selves to even be male, the feminine within us, by our mutuality, what happens is the full hegemony of masculinization. If the achievements of feminism is getting equal pay, for Pete's sakes, we've lost the whole game. And the problem is many people are talking about that in proper language when we're killing them softly, as the Gene Kilborn film has it. And this is what bothers me about it. For one final thing. At a university in the United States, so some of the so-called women's sensibility things have gotten past that when a guy and a gal are about to make out, you have to ask the other person every step of the way, can I kiss you? Can I put my arm around you? Can I hug you? This is the most insane understanding of human sexuality. You've got that going on, and they're reading Vogue magazine. They're wearing Calvin Klein. It's chaos. That's why I would challenge the church. The church can talk about materialism till they want. Look at Sunday morning TV and what the church does. Put your hand on the TV set and send $1,000. You know, priests get up in pulpits and say, you only gave $5,000 last week. Is that all you love God? The problem is, can feminists and clergy and people be self-critical about this? And I think what happens is we got no-nos. We can't bring this up. Well, I'll tell you, I know feminists has as many sins as macho people do. We've all got our problems. And only when we understand that we've all got our blind spots and we really deeply need each other to call forth our humanity, that's when I have up. But I didn't mean to deride feminism as a movement. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
So more.
Well, I guess if I could continue with that, I happen to see a lot of the way out of the kind of chaos that you talk about in feminist movement. But, you know, that's me. You have probably other places that you look for those kinds of answers. I'm interested in, and perhaps this is going to be taken up in later lectures, in your next two lectures, some talk about strategies, right, in terms of, well, here it is. I teach in this world where the real education system is the stuff that you presented, right, and the stuff that other people have talked about, particularly the man from public relations, about how this is insidious. It's built into.
With a sense of sometimes, well, where do you go, or it's so bad, or is there any positive thing to do? And I think your mentioning of strategies is really crucial. That's why usually when I give it, I insist on giving 2 talks, because this is too lopsided. It isn't even adequate in terms of understanding the culture. But tomorrow, you're right, I'm going to focus it more in terms of some of the ethical and academic issues of strategy, but I can say very simply, what I'm convinced of is the strategy is to precisely reclaim personal life. And this involves a number of things. It primarily involves a rediscovery of solitude. I think many of us have forgotten how to rest and abide in the simple truth of who we are. I believe solitude is one of the most powerful ways of disengaging from these cultural imperatives. And yet even when we go into solitude often, that is dominated by the media. Some of us can't bear to live without the TV or the radio on. We're so passive in terms of the reception of this data. So the first strategy, oddly enough, I believe, you could talk in terms of spirituality, is prayer. But in terms of the discipline of life is solitude. The second is the rediscovery of community. There's a major problem in the breakdown in community. I think a commitment to communitarian life is crucial in Canada or the United States to recover that sense of mutuality and relationship that in many ways is consumed by our culture. That's a discipline. I think it's as important as a discipline as getting a degree.
learning the disciplines of solitude and of mutuality. Third, I think since this is systemic and political activism is a crucial dimension of one's response. Whether it involves in responding to the 6 or the 5 major people running for election and trying to reveal much of the deception that might be in all of their campaigns, and many of the questions that are never asked. For example, in the United States, these 2 people that ran the last time, I voted for neither one of them. None of them appealed to our human sense of solidarity. None of them appealed to generosity. And I think we have to do some political unmasking of this, sometimes through activism, sometimes through education. Fourth, I believe, simplicity of life is a crucial discipline. We have to learn how to live with limits, Ralph Lauren notwithstanding. I think some women ought to be bold enough. We talk about women and men in this thing, but some women ought to be bold enough to say as much as we do about, I don't buy Domino's pizza or I don't eat meat. We ought to say, I don't buy Calvin Klein because our guest jeans. We don't have to impose that on other people, but we make people known about our other political stands. I think we should let people know about our I know young people that respond to that. And when you look at Calvin Klein and you look at guest jeans, those empires have been built on these images. And I think you don't even have to talk about boycott. But we communicate to these people. I get people every day telling me they're vegetarians or they don't drink coffee or they don't think this and that. Why not say what we believe politically in terms of the treatment of women in our media, for example? So, political activism. Finally, I believe we have to unmask the pretenses of culture. Now, this is a very nuanced thing, but I believe in teaching. I've convinced of this in teaching over 20 years. Young people learn more from a direct encounter of a poor or a marginal person than they do from any book. I think it's crucially important for people to unmask our illusions. That's why I think knowing and receiving, for example, from terminally ill people, handicapped people, people in prisons, people for whom the American dream is a nightmare. And if we encounter what it means to be a human in relationship and they call that forth from us, you got on your hands a free woman or a free man who's not afraid. Not afraid of the illusions and not afraid of having them unmasked. So I think it's a praxis that we're called to. And I think it's a praxis that if you don't have, all the academic stuff does not help. I think there are theoretical correlatives to that as well. But I think those are very important moves in terms of a programmatic response. Even though they may sound very personalized, I think they're intensely political. And the best political activists I've known in 20 years, who are still political activists, have been doing them. The ones who were political activists 25, 30 years ago and were not doing the solitude, the community, the simplicity, they're selling stuff. So that kind of programmatic I would recommend. I don't think it's bad to sell, by the way. I think entrepreneurship's a great thing. I think business is a good thing. I think it helps build the human community. My problem is the reality system when it becomes the absolute. You know, I get kids telling, the last one I was teaching in New York at St. John's, the common refrain is kids telling me, you've got to be realistic. You know, we talk about the women thing. I've showed this to a group of high school seniors, honor students, and after we saw this, a guy raised his hand and he says, Father, you've been in the seminary too long. Men have always used women. You've got to get real. See, this is what I'm trying to get at in terms of a reality system that even, the most rigid masculinist you cannot break through. And if you don't see that this reality system is deeper than the problem of feminism, it's deeper than our culture too. And you see this in the way women are treated as property in a lot of cultures. Why is it, for example, the feminist thing, why is it in China there are 6 million missing girls under the age of 5? They're missing. Why is it in India, in Bombay, out of 10,000 abortions performed at a clinic that gives amniocentesis, 9,992 were female fetuses? Why is it in South America that if a woman gives birth to a second girl, she goes into mourning in some countries? We've got a problem with otherness. And we've got our own expression to deal with this. But I think this is a deep problem. That's why I responded so strongly, in defense, because I really believe there's a terrible wound in humanity over this issue of otherness, and the prime analogate is the man and the woman. There are other analogates. Different color skins, different nation, different class, otherness. And we so easily turn to domination and power. And I believe that will never solve the problem, because you've already capitulated by thinking it's going to be domination and power. That's what the dominant cultures use to keep people crushed. I think that's what's behind racism. So I think there are many programmatic things, even in terms of the feminist agenda, that we have to look into. Well, it's 9:45 and you look exhausted. Thank you for listening.
Father, on behalf of the audience and the university and the Sisters of Charity, I'd like to thank you, express our gratitude really for your presentation of this issue to us tonight. And we are certainly, at least a good number of us, looking forward to pursuing it tomorrow. I'd like to recall to the audience that the lectures continue tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock? 10:30 in the same place, and at 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon here also. I thought this evening that we might be competing with the Blue Jays, to mention TV again, but anyway, we are not competing with the Blue Jays. In any case, I would like to invite any and all of you, if you wish, to join us for coffee and pleasant conversation in the faculty lounge. If you come down and exit through this door, just continue left until you find room 405. Thank you, and we'll see you tomorrow.